Okay. Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, which is why local does not exist anymore and the importance of an international outlook. So a lot of this webinar is going to be focused on online sales, because that's the overall idea that we're coming up with here. So obviously, if you're online, you're international. Most people will be able to access your website and be able to have products shipped to them. So it's really important to gear all of your advertising towards an online a kind of international outlook, because the laws and the regulations that exist in your local market might be very different if you're then marketing to a different country and getting customers in that different country as well. So there's a lot about the regulation, but also a really important thing to think about in a marketing point of view, because you want to be able to make your product stand out as most as it can in an international market, and certainly some sort of evidence and data to do that. So to give you a little look at the agenda, we'll be looking at the global advertising standards organisations. We'll be looking at methods of claim substantiation. We'll be looking at choosing the appropriate study design and methodology, and sharing some case studies which show, this important claim substantiation methodology, but also how you can use those marketing claims online to really put your brand out there, and really get those marketing claims across. So I'm joined by Thomas today, who is our managing partner of the German franchise for Ayton Global Research. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Carys. We're happy to. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm the head of Ayton Germany for the last 5 or 6 years. I've got more than 25 years of experience in market research, so I'm passionate about market research and insights and understanding what people think and what people want and what people do, and helping not only Ayton but also other companies to get closer to the consumers and really get a gist out of it, because I think this is vital for all business success, is being close to your consumers and understanding them. I've seen too many companies being too much in their ivory tower and thinking they know what people want, which sometimes may be right, sometimes isn't. But that's why this is in a way my obsession and my profession, and that's why I'm happy also to help over here.
Thank you, Thomas. And to introduce myself, if you haven't met me before, I'm the Regulatory Director at Ayton Global Research. So I'm very passionate about all the regulations which affect the evidence that we provide our clients for our consumer research and how they can use that to advertise their products. So generally, we're looking at a lot of advertising regulation globally. But also some cosmetic regulations, because usually we're testing a lot of cosmetics, and any other regulations which would affect the evidence that we're providing for our clients. So I've worked at the company for about 8 years now, and I've worked my way through all different sort of departments and jobs there. So I've got a really good oversight of how the process works and how clients need to use our data as well. So I'm going to hand back to Thomas now to introduce the online market.
Yeah, thanks, Carys. Just some facts and figures. I think nobody would disagree with me with saying that online market is huge and is growing like hell. 2019, the worldwide sales were about 3.53 trillion US dollars, and they will grow tremendously, probably double until 2022. So online shopping is a extremely popular activity, and you see a lot of retail sales shifting to online, accelerated to Corona, which I will come back to in a minute. This applies even more to health, personal care, and beauty. There's an even higher share of sales going to than in some other categories. And you also see that more and more companies are coming up who concentrate on this and exploit this in terms of also of communicating, influencing, etc. So that this is actually a really important issue in our industry. If we go to the next chart. I'm not sure if I can steer this. So we are all in the middle of COVID. As I don't need to mention this, but it's maybe worth reflecting a second on the impact this has on online sales, because as people either cannot go out or do not want to go out to go shopping, of course you go back to your computer and you shop. And in terms of health and beauty industry, some people actually feel that still health and beauty are important, and you need to go on shopping, and then you buy online. It has soared in the UK. These are some UK figures. this has actually increased more than doubled in the beginning of the COVID crisis. And even in the longer term perspective, I mentioned that it was about 10% of the sales were online. I just saw some recent figures just published by an international study where they project this to raise from 10 to 16% in this year and increasing to 23% by 2025, which means a fourth of all sales in health and beauty will be online.
So going to the regulatory side, so as Thomas said, the online sales are huge. the way to go, if you're looking at marketing your product, I don't think there's going to be any brand in the world that won't want to go to online, especially during this time that we're in of a global pandemic. But what it means is you need to be really cautious of advertising self-regulation, what that is, who's involved, and make sure that you're compliant in every country that you're selling your products with your adverts. So ad self-regulation is basically how the industry regulates itself when it comes to advertising. And the idea of it for every country that has a self-regulatory organization in the world is to make sure that the adverts are legal, honest, decent, and truthful. It's to protect consumers, but it's also to protect competitors. So making sure there's a good competitive market out there and that people aren't just sort of saying what they want about their product to sell it, because this would be really unfair. But also definitely for consumers as well. You shouldn't be misleading consumers to purchase your product. They should be purchasing it with an informed decision about what they should expect their results to be from using it. So there's three parts of the industry. There's the advertisers who pay for the advertising agencies who are responsible for its form and content, and the media that carry it. So if you're involved in any part of that stage in advertising, you really need to be aware of what the code of conducts are for these advertising self-regulatory organizations, because they'll be coming to you for responsibility. So mainly they work on a complaints basis. So almost every advertising standards authority will work with, basically they'll receive complaints either from a consumer or from a competitor. Usually if something like an ad's offensive or something like that, but also mainly if they feel that the advert's not truthful and that you're misleading either the consumer from the consumer's point of view or from your competitor's point of view. So obviously for a consumer, if they have a product and it says makes hair feel smoother, and they're like, well, my hair doesn't feel smooth after using it, they might complain and say, I don't believe that's actually what this product does. And a competitor usually would do it if they find you've got a claim on your product that they can't make. So maybe it's something like 24-hour hydration and they've only achieved 12-hour, they might question the validity of that claim and see if you can actually make that. So that's kind of how these advertising authorities work. You should always see them as a friend and not a foe, I say, because you shouldn't see it as they're going to chase you down and check for evidence. As long as you are abiding by their code of conduct and you have evidence behind your claims, they should be a friend to you, because you can use their platform to complain about your competitors, but also know that if they were ever to approach you, you absolutely have the evidence that you need and that your adverts are going to be in their correct code of conduct. So a couple of resources to think about. We've got the International Chamber of Commerce. They have a framework for the self-regulation, and a lot of countries adopt that. So about 52 countries worldwide have adopted that now. So it's a really good place to start if you're not sure about what the code of conducts are, you're not sure about where you're advertising your product, you can have a look at that framework and get a really good idea of the general overview of what kind of regulations you should be looking at and how your adverts should be portrayed. There's also ICAS, which is the International Council for Ad Self-Regulation. And they have basically a council of different advertising SROs over the world that come together and have a shared kind of ideology when it comes to their code of conduct. And they also publish news to do with any changes to advertising regulation. So it's kind of just signposting, because like I said, if we're talking about this online sales, you obviously will have an idea of where you're selling, but you also want to have that global kind of mindset and be thinking about all these different organizations and what the shared kind of cohesive idea is behind their code of conduct for advertising. Because as long as you're abiding by that, you should be very safe, as well as looking specifically. So by looking specifically, I've brought up some countries to give you an example of who is kind of using this ad self-regulation format, and who isn't as well. So you've got the UK, India, Australia, and Brazil, who all have advertising SROs. So it's self-regulation. They have code of conducts they put out there. People will complain to them about your adverts if they want to, and they are the ones that approach you. So they'll even be asking you to remove your advert, which is generally the kind of idea. You can remove it if it's not got the evidence behind it. But if you choose not to do that, then trading standards can be involved as well. So don't feel like you can ignore their advice and ignore them approaching you. They absolutely have the authority to make sure that your adverts are removed in their content. Can be very expensive if your adverts are on your pack copy and you don't have the evidence to substantiate them and you can't get them. That could be removing the actual product from the shelves because that's your advert. So really important to be aware of. There's the FTC in America though, which is slightly different. So they're a federal agency, which means they're not self-regulation. They're actually federally kind of involved. And they can approach you as well to remove adverts. The USA can be a bit of a wild west because they don't tend to have a really clear code of conduct about misleading ads. And they, especially for cosmetics, you don't even have to register them before you sell them, for most cosmetics anyway. So a lot of people put ads out there and find that actually they've put things out there that are misleading, maybe weren't informed about it, and you can end up with a lawsuit from the FTC where we've got a bunch of people who have all complained about the advert, and they'll actually compile a lawsuit and you'll get a huge fine, which you really won't want to have. So really important again to think about these different ways that adverts are being portrayed out there. There's also laws, again, really important. If you've got a online brand, you really want to be aware of the laws as well in the countries that your brand may be represented, because this is illegal at this point. It's not kind of unadvised. This could mean that your adverts are illegal, and it certainly comes into place when you're looking at things like offensive advertising. So a couple of examples for you. We've got the National Media Council in the UAE. So they have their own self-regulatory organization, which is called the Advertising Business Group. But then they've also got the National Media Council, who are looking at it from a federal point of view again. So there's laws involved, and they will obviously be putting out punishments there for people that go against those laws. There's the FDA in the USA. So they work really tightly with the FTC. Again, especially if you're looking at cosmetics, they put out laws there to make sure that the consumers are protected, and that could be also to do with misleading advertising. And in China, you've also got the advertising law the advertising law of the People's Republic of China, and that was strengthened in 2015 again to make sure there's tougher rules and tougher rules on the advertisers to make sure the consumers are protected. So there's a lot to think about when you're advertising, and as we've been talking about with this title of this, don't think locally. Look at all of these things from the get-go when you're putting your advert out there, because the last thing you want to do is end up offending someone or misleading someone, that you could have avoided from the get-go. So I also want to talk about cosmetic claims. So as mentioned, if you're not from the cosmetic industry, this always really applies to any, but as I know many of you will be, and most of our claims tend to be on cosmetics. We like to make a lot of claims on cosmetics. So there's common criteria outlined by the EU cosmetics regulation. So this might be EU based, but it's an incredibly helpful guideline, I think, no matter where you're advertising in the world, because as long as you're thinking of these common criteria, generally you're going to be abiding by the kind of code of conduct regulations and everything like that, because they're really clearly set out. So just briefly to go into each one, we've got legal compliance, which basically means you can't state that your product is legally compliant. It has to be. So obviously, if you are selling in the EU, it has to abide by all of the EU cosmetics products regulation. And you can't sort of say that it does that as a claim on your product. It has to. It has to be truthful. So if you say have a product that has CBD in a face cream, you can't not have CBD in that. We've seen that a lot with CBD products, especially in the USA again, where they've kind of had watchdogs go in there and test these products and find out actually there's no CBD in there at all. You need to have evidential support, which will come really nicely into the next part of the presentation when me and Thomas will show you about consumer research and how you can use that as evidence to support all of your claims, because you can't just say a claim without having a clue if it actually can do that or not. You need to have some statistical data there. You need to be honest. So you can't sort of say, once I've done my consumer research, I did it on 50 people, and 98% of them agreed that the moisturizer was softening. I think if I did this test again, I would probably get it on 100 people. So I'm going to say 100 people in my advertising because it sounds better. No, if it's 50 people, you have to put 50 people on there. So you always have to be very honest about how you're presenting that data. It has to be fair. So the good example of this is always a comparison study. So you couldn't have an anti-dandruff shampoo and test it against a product that has no anti-dandruff properties and say it's better at removing flakes, because that's not a fair comparison. And at the end of the day, the consumer always has to be able to make an informed decision. So as long as you're really abiding by all of those other kind of common criteria, generally the consumer should be able to make a really informed decision about whether they want to purchase your product. Always use language which is very, very clear about what the product can do and what they should expect to achieve by using the product. Also, there's types of claims that you need to think about kind of as the next step. So once you've got your criteria in place and you know you're being compliant, how would you then get evidence to substantiate them, and what kinds of evidence would you need? So sensory and product aesthetic claims are very much to do with how the product looks, how it smells, the packaging, things like this, all things that you can substantiate through a consumer perception study. Performance claims is about the efficacy. So as I said earlier, if it's about making the skin soft, that's something that needs to be substantiated. We need to make sure that we've got some evidence behind it. And that might be achieved through the consumer or clinical studies, depending on what kind of level of claim you want to make there. Ingredient claims, like I mentioned earlier, CBD, if it's got CBD in it, you can say that on your packaging or in your advertising. Combination claims to do with, the shampoo was used better with this conditioner. A consumer research study can be used to say that the consumers perceived a better effect when using both products together. You can have comparison studies. So this is usually for competitors or against a formula. So you might say new and improved formula. Subjective claims, which is exactly what consumer research is and what I'll talk about shortly in more detail, is anything that a consumer can perceive and it's subjective to them. Objective claims are, again, the exact opposite. So it's clinical studies, so something that can only be measured by science. So more detail about consumer research. So I've mentioned it a few times, and this is what me and Thomas do. So consumer research studies are basically anything a consumer can perceive with the naked eye. So obviously you can sort of say 24-hour hydration because that's something that has to be measured in the skin, but you could say my skin felt hydrated all day. So it's kind of this kind of perception, basically. It also means things like marketing claims, because you can say I would buy this product or I would recommend this product. Again, they can't be measured. This is something that's really subjective to a person. Generally looking at in-home user tests, so the participants are sent products to test at home, and then they use the product in actual use. So, how they would use that product, they picked it up off the shelf, followed the usage directions, and then they answer an evaluation about it. So it's really good for assessing how your product will actually perform. Again, clinical data won't really help you achieve this. You'd probably still want to get a consumer perception study as well to make sure that all of your usage directions are being followed and they are giving the consumers the effect you want them to have. It's really good for adverse reactions as well, because obviously your safety test will give you some information about whether the product causes any adverse reactions, but that'll be on a very minimal amount of people. When you actually put it out to 100 people, you might find that there are adverse reactions that you didn't expect, or you might be more informed about kind of expected adverse reactions people could get from the product. So generally people are assessing the efficacy of one product or comparing it. And as mentioned, you might want additional evidence as well. And it's certainly something that we can advise on. If you've got claims in mind, we can give you really clear guidance on what can be achieved through consumer perception and what should also have some clinical evidence behind it. So why else to kind of conduct consumer studies? We've talked a lot about advertising claims and substantiating them, but when we're saying about thinking internationally and not locally, this is where consumer research is also really going to come into handy. So it's ensuring that your product is regulatory compliant. So like I said, looking at those advertising standards, codes of conduct, you want to test in a country which is at least representative of the countries that you're selling your product. So I always use the example of a long-lasting foundation. We might test a long-lasting foundation in the UK on people that have reasonably dry skin in a very cool climate, and they might assess that foundation and say it's long-lasting. We could then send that same foundation to Malaysia, where it's a much hotter climate and people tend to have a more oily skin type, and they might say that that foundation isn't long lasting at all. So it's really important to, before making a claim about your product, know that you've got all of the information that you need about it. So if someone in the UK wasn't to complain about your product, the advertising authorities, someone in Malaysia very much could, and that advert could still be withdrawn. So it's really important to make sure you've got that research at an early stage before you start making those claims. You can also assess the product acceptability with those target groups and things like the propensity to buy. So again, might be very different opinion from people in UK to Malaysia in terms of actually if they like the product or if they would buy it at the prices that you're kind of proposing, because people do have very different opinions worldwide. So it's a really good way to kind of assess that before you're looking at selling your products online, and if you've got an idea of where you want to be selling those products. I've got some examples there of the kinds of claims you could expect to make with consumer research. So generally looking at things like percentage claims, like 88% of people agree. But you can also do things like generalize it to like things like 9 out of 10 women would recommend the product. You can also just use it to substantiate claims as a whole. But it's a really nice way of displaying the data. I'll go through some actual examples of this with real life examples of a branded case study as well, so you can see how that looks. So I'm going to hand over to Thomas to go through a case study first about a leading pharmacy and how they had a kind of international outlook from the get-go with their product. And just before I do that, I want to introduce a bit of the legislation. As we said earlier, that you need to be really aware of the legislation from those advertising authorities in each country. One of the countries this product was tested in, just as an example, was France. So this has been lifted straight from their code of conduct, so you can get an idea of what it looks like specifically. So they're saying that any claim needs to be clear, fair, objective, and should not mislead. It must be supported by appropriate proofs. And that before and after visuals as well. So something we haven't mentioned too much is that you might want before and after pictures. So they need to reflect a representative of the product test sample. So it needs to be that people were sent a product to test and that the before and after photos represent that group. So it just gives you some more really specific code of conduct there, because it's easy to talk about as a whole, but you can get an idea of how clear it can be and how important it is for you to have evidence. So over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, in a way, I liked especially the phrase of appropriate proof, which is in a way a bit of a bendable formulation, and for who is to decide what's appropriate. And this is actually why why we come to a topic to test internationally, because is it appropriate to have tested in another country? To take your example, UK is probably not appropriate for Malaysia, certainly not. Is Italy appropriate for France? I don't know. so it's probably up to the French authorities to decide what they deem appropriate or not. And that's why it's quite interesting to go across countries. And if you want to be on the safe side, go broader. And this is one of a nice example that we found over here, the day and night cream by a leading pharmacy in the UK, in the EU, who tested to be sure, tested in key countries across Europe, in Spain, Germany, France, Italy, and Portugal. So they didn't want to rely on the French authorities accepting a test in Spain. They wanted to make sure that actually this being tested in France, because then you can definitely be sure that French consumers will validate the claims if the claims are validated, and it will hold true. Another thing is also that's worth mentioning is we're not talking about claims. The other key thing is actually why you test in different countries is, of course, to understand acceptability of products across different markets. Because we know the market situation is different in different markets. You've got different climate situation, you've got different competitive situation. People are used to different products. And this, of course, is a major impact in how far they will accept for instance, an innovation or any other new product. So again, it's sometimes worth going across different countries. And of course, there's always a kind of trade-off to understand how much do you want to invest. You certainly can't test in all countries that you want to go and want to market in, especially if we really talk about smaller countries. But it's probably worth looking at, especially at the bigger countries, and test there to be sure that you A, have the market acceptability, and B, the claims hold true for that market. Go to the next chart. So this was a regime product. So we had 2 products in here in these 5 countries that I mentioned before. It was a longer test. It took 6 weeks. So they even could see the development of the skin over 6 weeks and how far people perceive what the product does in the course of 6 weeks. Then a broad mix of skin types, and especially going deeper into some with sensitive skins. And some other more details that I don't know to go. I think I need to go into here. If we go into the test results, so these were some of the claims that were tested across. This is a typical chart that is shown in the standard report that we produce. Where we on the left-hand side, you've got the claims that were directly asked to consumers. The first one, my skin is protected from redness and flushing associated with the heat. And you see that overall, 253 people agreed to that statement and 46 didn't agree, which means that overall you've got 84% agreeing to the statement. We can decide beforehand what we should do and do normally beforehand is saying, what is the barrier? What's the range actually from which on you believe that the claim is validated? We generally tend to set it about 2/3. So if 2/3 of the respondents agree to the statement, we believe the claim is validated. You might go a bit lower than that. That's a matter of argumentation. I think there's also no real legal requirement as a percentage, but I think in general 2/3 is a well accepted barrier of boundary of acceptance. So if more than 66% of the consumers agree to the statement, it is validated. And we're the same then for the other statements over here. Just taking some examples, what quite a big test with quite a few claims. The serums are suitable to use in the summer. Serums reduces the appearance of my wrinkles and my skin feels boosted with vitality. So all these claims were validated on a general scale. But as we talk about international, I may go to next chart. It's also worth looking at this on a country level. And here I've graphically visualized the results per country. Again, we saw that overall it was 84% who agreed to that, but you see some smaller differences between countries, with the highest agreement in Spain and the lowest agreement in Germany. Germany just a little bit about the border of 66%, so not that much. But it might have to do with the Germans being a bit more skeptic, might have to do with heat being not so prevalent in Germany as it is in Spain and Portugal. So also I don't know actually at what time of the year the test was done, but it might certainly have to do with that. But we also can look for the other claims. The serums are suitable for use in the summer. Even higher levels of agreement. This time a little bit lower in Italy and France, and the highest is Spain again. And for the last claim, my skin feels boosted vitality. Again, we see that claim is validated not only overall with more than 91%, but it's validated across all countries. Again, the Spanish people seem to be most positive, the German ones the least positive, but very positive overall. So we can clearly say the claim is not only validated overall, but even if the local authorities in one country want to look at the country data, we can reasonably say actually participants in our country have validated the claim and agree to the statements. So very, very solid results. But the second issue that the client want to find out is actually also, is it marketable in all countries? And if you then go for the purchase interest, if the price was right, would you buy the product? We see some remarkable differences that in the 4 Southern European countries, again, clearly more than 80% showed purchase interest. In Germany, it was less than 60%. So this might have different reasons. As I said, it might have to do with the product performance in terms of, especially also as it's a heat-resistant product, and heat is not so prevalent in Germany. It might have to do with the German mentality, who are a bit more negative. It might have to do with the German market, with the market situation, that maybe there is a competitor that is a bit stronger in there. So this would actually require going a bit more in depth, maybe go for a comparison test, which we will go to in the next one of our next webinars. Maybe go against another competitor to understand actually if these results are bad in Germany or if they're good and good enough in Germany to launch a product. At least I wouldn't immediately jump to a major launch in Germany without going a bit deeper into the data and exploring this a bit further, whilst I would be fairly confident that in the other countries this is a product that can fly. So just to briefly summarize it, the key claims are validated overall and in all countries. We have a high purchase interest in all Southern European countries, which is probably also with this kind of heat product, the most relevant ones. Germany still, as the biggest market in Germany, is something that would require a bit more elaboration, as there's so far a fairly moderate purchase interest. So I would recommend to go deeper in market research and explore a bit further why this is not as good as it could be. At any rate, I think these were some strong results that the company can work with. Talking about different countries, a topic that is, especially now with Ayton being a UK company, is something that I think is keeping everybody busy. We all know that by the end of this year, British and EU legislation will go separate ways, one way or the other. We don't know exactly what this will look like, if there will be a deal or not. At any rate, we will go into some separate legal situations and legal systems, which means that companies that want to export to both areas need to take a dual approach to legally market their products. Getting access to the UK market doesn't mean you got access to the European market, and vice versa. You will really need to work on both things, and it's probably very likely that quite a few products by the end of this year will suddenly lose the license to be sold in the EU or in the UK. So I know that all of you who are dealing with this problem are very busy on this. But what does it mean for claims? So far, we haven't found any legal documentation on what it means in terms of claims. However, so we think that claims valid in the UK will probably still be accepted by European organizations and vice versa, but this is just an assumption. We don't know yet. And just to be sure, just we had in the example before, if you want to make sure that you can go on, we recommend at least considering a dual approach also for claim testing, which means if you want to enter Europe and the UK, test claims in Europe and the UK, a selected country, depending on what you want to do. Germany, well, I'm slightly biased, but Germany is the biggest country in EU, certainly might be a candidate. So just for your consideration and for your planning for next year, this is maybe something to keep in mind. These tests don't cost a fortune, and it may save you a lot of hassle if you think of it right from the start in advance.
Absolutely, definitely, and it's I think that's the nice thing about the consumer research that we provide as well, is that you get an overall report for both countries anyway, so you still get that kind of big old data there, but you do get those separate reports as well. So if you were approached by a European Advertising Authority and they wanted some EU data, you'd be able to provide that separately as well as together with that overall report. So it's certainly something to consider, as Thomas said, moving forward as we're kind of going to this time. So on the other kind of side of the case study, so obviously Thomas has gone through how really important it is to think about cross countries for making sure your product's accepted. On the other side of it, I really want to go through a branded presentation with you about how you can use that consumer research data to really elevate your marketing and your brand position online. Because as I was saying, it really relates to this international idea, making sure your claims are substantiated, and then really utilizing that online approach for that international market. So the case that I want to talk about is a brand called Kingsley. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're a hair care brand. They're very much driven by the science behind hair. The product we're looking at particularly today is a Pure Blonde Booster. So it's a color correcting mask. So obviously for blonde hair, put it on your hair and it should get rid of the brassy tones that are in the hair. So they really want to make sure that they can use this across their pack copy, their website and their social media. use all the claims on everything there. And again, it's about neutralizing and clarifying the hair. We want to get some before and after photos as well, so they've got further evidence for their marketing. Sometimes that people, advertising authorities will ask for this, but again, also it really helps you elevate that marketing. So again, looking at the legislation, this was conducted in the UK. So again, specifically looking at the UK legislation and what the Code of Conduct is saying from the ASA, they're saying that any censorial claims which are based on opinion should be substantiated with consumer research data. So again, it's making sure that those subjective claims are there. And it's certainly a product that really surrounds that, because we're asking people if their hair looked better, if they preferred the look of their hair after using the mask, and it's really not a scientific sort of measurement. So who did we recruit? Well, it's a UK study, as mentioned. It's a 28-day study. So because it's a weekly mask, we wanted them to use it at least 4 times. So obviously that meant 4 weeks in total. They had to have either bleached or dyed hair. So we wanted to get 50% of both, because I'm not sure people have used blonde hair before, but using a hair dye and specifically bleaching it can have a different tone on the hair anyway. And certainly dyeing it does tend to give it a more brassy tone. So we wanted to really see that comparison there. And again, they needed to have some kind of brassiness in their hair. We didn't want to send it to people that already had lovely white blonde hair, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see any difference at all. And again, they couldn't have used something really recently, because obviously it would be too fresh to be able to tell that difference. So firstly, I just want to look at the before and after photos. Now, these are very much at-home photos. So we can provide different kind of levels of photos that you need. So we tend to do at-home photos when we send out the products, because it's really easy for our volunteers to be able to take a sort of selfie of the hair. It may not be the photos you'd use on something like QVC. If you wanted to do that, we're looking at getting a professional photographer, which we can also do. But it certainly gives you a really good idea of your product performance, and how, gives you that extra data. But also these can be used in your marketing. It's absolutely fine, and it gives a nice at-home feel for your marketing. So you can see the before and after. We've gone from more yellowy blonde to a lovely icy kind of blonde there, and it kind of really clearly shows us that. So looking at the data, so as Thomas has explained, this is kind of lifted from our report. It's a bit of a summary, but it gives you an idea of how this product performed. So what was really good about this product is not only did it neutralize the brassy tones and get rid of the warm tones in the blonde hair, it was a mask. So they also wanted to show that it's really nourishing on the hair. So the first claim was about being deeply nourished after use. So they've got this really good dual kind of claim that they're really pressing with this product to make sure it really stands out in that market, because a lot of products that you use that get rid of brassy tones can actually really dry the hair out. So certainly this one was going down the nourishment route as well. And as you can see, we've got some really, really high claims here. So fantastic kind of basis for them to start using that data in that marketing, and particularly for the claims to do with neutralizing the tones and cooling the tones of the sort of warm brassy tones. We've got over 90% there. So really excellent. And obviously when you have excellent claims like that, you really want to show them in your marketing online. So the first thing was just to look at their website. So how did they put this product on their website? So we've got the benefits of the product there, which saying it clarifies and nourishes brassy blonde hair, but a deeply nourishing hair, instantly neutralizing brassy blonde tones, and leaving the hair feeling restored and looking clarified. Those are all the kind of wording that we use in our questions, and we know those claims passed. So it's not just thinking about putting it as a percentage claim. You can write it in a way like this, which as long as you've got those individual claims tested and they will pass, you can then write it on your website in a bit more of an attractive copy. And underneath it again, we've brought some more claims in the product description, brought more claims to the attention. So increasing hair strength and resistant to breakage, which would have been seen in a clinical study, smooths and hydrates, and drawing moisture into the hair shaft. So you can see how they've used both consumer and clinical data there. And again, it's what you mentioned earlier, you might want to look at both kind of options to really give the scientific description, but the overall benefits that people look into straight away are those really relatable claims they've got through the perception data. And also on social media. So as I mentioned about it being online, social media is going to be your best friend if you're looking at online marketing. So on Instagram, they've got their 90% agreed with the warm tones were cooled in my hair. We've seen that on the report. So we saw exactly how they've lifted it from the report there. And we've also got the before and after photos as well. And you can see how they've made them look really attractive in their advertising, again, I think I was on Instagram or Facebook. So they've literally got the darker blonde before and that lovely light icy blonde next to it. So it's a really good way of using that data to really push forward their marketing. So to summarize, before we kind of summarize finish up the webinar and go to a Q&A, always make sure to test in representative markets to ensure that your international claims are substantiated. So as we've mentioned a few times, basically you really want to make sure that any claims you're making in your product are going to be recognized by the consumers that are in that climate. Claims can really make a difference. As Thomas said in the example, the way that Germany reacted a bit more negatively, not hugely negatively to the product, but a bit more negatively, could be to do with the climate there. But at least the client has the data from both those countries there to know how they're going to use that. You can use it to establish the product acceptability. So again, we looked at, would they buy this product? Might make you really gear your marketing in a certain way. So might make you say, well, we might still sell the product in Germany, but let's really push it in Spain because we know it's going to sell there. It really gives your marketing team an idea of what their targets are. Utilize it for online marketing, again, social media, website. Don't be one of these people that gets your consumer research data and thinks, great, my product's compliant, and then doesn't do anything with it, because I've seen it a million times. Use those claims, like I said, 90% agree, put that on an Instagram post, really show it off, because it will really elevate your marketing. Be really aware of online sales regulations though. So I just wanted to kind of finish up by bringing it to people's attention. There are things online that people can stop thinking about when it comes to advertising and regulations. So product reviews are fantastic, but I've seen clients before not make any claims about their products, so not get any claim substantiation, then rely on these product reviews. But the problem is there's all this information being put out there about your product that has no evidence behind it. It can essentially become an advert in itself, and you could get in a bit of trouble with advertising authorities for it. So make sure you have claim substantiation no matter what, so you're able to use that in your marketing. And it's very much the same as social media influencers. Obviously, they're giving a review, they have to be true for themselves, but if you've got no other evidence behind it, they'll become your advert. So everything they're saying, if it's unsubstantiated, could be your advert. And also, they've got really important rules to do with advertising anyway, themselves, with fines and things like this if they don't say it's an advert. So be really cautious to make sure that any social media influencers you're working with are really aware of the regulations there as well. And be really wary of e-commerce fraud. So this is something that has been an issue for a while and has actually been hugely in countries like Mexico, where your product is essentially being copied and sold like it's your product, but it's not. And we saw a few years ago, there were certainly things that came out about products being tested that had rat poison in them, but they weren't from the brand, they were from people that had made counterfeit products. So be very, very wary about getting your brand out there, and all these other little things that just you should be kind of really cautious of, basically. So just before we go to a Q&A, I just want to summarize by giving you a little bit more information about us, because obviously you've heard about the wonderful research we can do, but why should you choose us as a research provider? So we're an award-winning research agency. We've won awards for International Business and Family Business of the Year. We are completely compliant with the GDPR regulations. Of course, we have to be because we're in the EU, but we also have an ISO 27001. Sorry, I said it my eyes here. I'm going to move to the side. So we also have an ISO 27001, which means we're audited on our processes here, which is hugely important when you've got a database of over 600,000 volunteers worldwide. We need to make sure we're protecting their data and keeping it anonymous. We've got undesirable event reporting, which I touched on earlier, and that is obviously compliant with the Cosmetic Vigilance Act. We've also got product liability insurance, which protects our consumers and you and ourselves. If anyone does have a serious undesirable event, everyone is protected. We've got an ISO 9001, which is to do with our quality assurance. We're a partner to the Market Research Society, so you'll know that our research is being done ethically, and we've all been trained with things like questionnaire design. You'll get your own regulatory advice, which will come from me. I can always help you out with some regulatory advice. And if I don't know the answers, I can certainly signpost you to a rich network of people. And you'll get a designated study manager, which is how I started out at the company, which is someone that will know you and your company and your research objectives inside and out, and make sure you can get your data and use it exactly how you need to. So let's open it up to a Q&A there. I hope you're all still with me. It's a lot of information today, but you can feel free to type any questions in the Q&A box, and Thomas and I will do our very best to answer them. As always as well, if you feel a bit under pressure, feel free to email them after. I will send out the webinar recording, as well as our contact information for both me and Thomas at the end of the webinar as well. So you'll be able to just email us if you've got any questions or if you've got any projects you'd like to discuss.
People seem to be happy.
Everyone seems to be happy. Well, we've done our job then. Great. Well, like I said, feel free to reach out. So just to finish off, I just want to point your attention to the direction of the SCS, which is the Society of Cosmetic Scientists. They've got a cosmetic science course, a course in the diploma course in the Essentials of Cosmetic Science, which is a distance learning course and can be done anywhere in the world. So feel free to have a look at that if you're interested in cosmetic science and would like a diploma. They're also holding the IFSCC Congress in September 2022, so a way off yet, which hopefully means by then we will be meeting in person to have events again. And you can register your interest of that now. So feel free to look at that website. Our next webinar, so we've got 2 more coming up jointly with me and Thomas. So the next one is on the 2nd of October. I can't believe it's nearly October reading that. This month's gone by quickly. But the next one's going to be how to create a good advertising claim, which if you've been following any of our webinars would be great, because we talk about it all the time, about what's good advertising, what's compliant advertising, but how would you do that? And then also, as Thomas mentioned earlier, on the 16th of October, we'll be doing a webinar all about comparison testing and comparison claims. So really handy if that's something that you're looking at doing. So thank you very much for listening. There's our contact information there as well, but as mentioned, it will be followed up on email. Thank you very much for joining me, Thomas, as well.
Thank you, Carys. It was a pleasure as always.
And I really hope everyone's enjoyed that and has a fantastic weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.